What an absolute delight to be here. Thank you so much for all making it through the tube strike. And it's my absolute honor to introduce our special guest, the incredible, the extraordinary, Sir Tim Berners-Lee. Of course, inventor of the World Wide Web in 1989. Since then, through the work with the World Wide Web Consortium, the Open Data Institute, the World Wide Web Foundation, the development of the Solid Protocol, and now as CTO and co-founder of Inrupt, he has been a tireless advocate for shared standards, open web access for all, and the power of individuals on the web. Of course, he's been given many awards, many accolades, and in 2004, her late Queen Elizabeth, the Majesty of the Queen, knighted Sir Tim, and you were also appointed to the Order of Merit by Her Majesty as well. Today, please join me in welcoming Sir Tim Berners-Lee. Well, Tim, yes, well, it's wonderful to see you here. And of course, this today marks the launch, the publication of your memoir. This is for everyone. Yes? And I think there are copies on the seats too as well, in case you've missed that. Tim, why did you feel that it was the right time now for your memoir?
Well, I haven't written a book since many years ago, and a lot has happened, I suppose, so I felt it was important to tell a story, but also I feel that the web is a situation where we really want to put some opinion in about it, about the future. I want to stake a course for where we are now to a better future than the one we're in now.
Yes, and I know we're going to talk a lot about that a little bit later on. But first of all, what was the experience like for you actually writing the memoir? What was it like to relive the extraordinary path that you've had so far?
Well, it's been really quite moving at times to go back over all of the history, some of the family history, some of the personal history, the colleagues, remembering funny stories of colleagues interacting and so on in the Web Consortium. And so it's been quite moving.
Has it been cathartic for you, do you think?
Yes, I think a bit cathartic. That's being able to go over, get everything, to a certain extent, get everything in order as well, get to remember all of the times we went to Africa and what order they happened in, and so on. So getting that sort of thing sorted out, I think, is good.
And of course, we were at 36 years on, could you ever have imagined the impact of creating one of the world's most successful, world-changing inventions ever made?
Well, sort of yes and no. Because the fact that no, of course, when I was developing the thing at CERN, I couldn't imagine that it would get to this state, it would cover the world like this. But on the other hand, even in the early days, it was ticking off exponentially. Yeah. And so because it was ticking off exponentially, then you realize that if it's going to go on, as it's done for this last 3 years, for example, for another 7 years, then sort of you do the math and you realize it's going to be big.
Yeah, of course. And how close do you think the World Wide Web in 2025 is to your original vision? What do you think have been some of the most significant changes over the years?
So, well, the original web was quite a simple, static web. It was you had web pages linking to each other. That was Web 1.0, sometimes we call it. Web 2.0 was when the web pages were actually dynamic, and so you'd find your way around things like Google Maps or the web became more powerful. But then now we're in a situation where people aren't making their own websites. A lot of people on Facebook,
Yeah.
and so it's not the same as it was early on.
Well, of course, we are in the midst of what you're talking about, the AI tech revolution. Do you see any comparisons, Tim, in how that's unfolding now and has unfolded to your own experience at the beginning of the web?
I think there's some ways in which, yes, it really, you can see the excitement, the exponential growth rate of growth. Some things are similar. Some things are very different.
Yeah.
The AI, there's no WTC as a consortium of AI people making them all sort of work together. Each of the AI companies is going hell for leather for the prize and really trying to get there first rather than work with other people. So there isn't so much we had a lot of collaboration around the web, which was great. I don't see that the same way for AI.
Well, if you don't mind, Tim, I'm going to take you back to where it all began for you. You were born in 1955, the same year as Steve Jobs and Bill Gates, which, looking back, is quite an amazing cohort of tech leaders there. How would you describe the young Tim? You were brought up, I believe, in East Sheen. Your parents, Mary Lee and Conway, they were both mathematicians and electronic engineers. What sort of values did they teach you and your siblings growing up?
Well, I think math. So they were both mathematicians, and they met building the first computer, when the idea of what a computer was, Alan Turing was sort of philosophically defining what a computer was and it wasn't. So those were very exciting days, and for them, I think for Mum and Dad, they were remarkable people, but also they were a remarkable time. They were very lucky to be in that team, on that tin hut along the side of the Franti factory building. So I think they were very lucky, and they passed on that excitement and with mathematics and computers to us kids.
Well, what was the household like? I believe that there was no pop culture, no television. You didn't know who Bruce Springsteen was till the tender age of 53, but I know, don't tell Bruce, please. But there was something very special that was within the household, and actually we've got it here tonight. It's amazing. It's a book that was very significant for you, and if I can I hope carefully pick it up, because I know that this is very, very precious, and this has come out of the safe, Tim. Inquire within upon everything.
So that book was in the big bookshelf in the front room. Even the title was intriguing.
Yeah.
In fact, inside it reckoned each edition tried to answer all of the questions that any household might have about how to sort of cook something or how to fix something, and it was it was just this idea that you could inquire within upon everything itself was a kind of a crazy idea, and of course they had to keep producing new versions, but each year. But the idea of it and the name I actually used later on for a program that I wrote in one of the sort of phases of thinking about which would end up leading to the web. I called the program Inquire Within.
And how much do you think that sort of childhood impacted on what you went on to do?
I think that the childhood, like Steve Jobs and Bill Gates, I was lucky that just as I was getting interested in physics, you could use your physics to make a electromagnet with nails and wire, and that allows you to, in principle, to make you could make a little thing that would store one bit of information. In fact, we call it now, and it would be about as big as a nail. But then, as we grew up, then the transistor was invented. Just the right time when I was getting interested in electronics, then the transistor was invented. And so the computers that Mum and Dad were building, instead of being made out of old vacuum tubes and so on, they started to be made out of transistors, and transistors got smaller and smaller and smaller, and so just at the time when I wanted to build my own computer, then I could get a whole chip full of transistors on a 2-inch long circuit, and which I could then solder into my computer. So that I think the fact that my cohort, people born in 1955, had the benefit of being able to see what a computer was to building their own computer. And people beforehand didn't have the power, there were no transistors. People afterwards, they take it all for granted. They just they're given a phone or a computer.
So that was definitely the year to be born, it sounds like, Tim.
Yeah.
And of course, after achieving very strong results and building your own computers there when you were at secondary school, at Emmanuel School, I believe it was, in London, you had the opportunity to go and study at Oxford. But there's something in the book that says, rather than your great knowledge of maths and physics, it may have been your taste in fashion that had an influence of you getting into Oxford. Can you tell us about that?
Well, I was nerdy, very unfashionable, and terrified about going to Oxford for the interview. So I imagined I went down to the shops, probably in Kingston, and looked around for something to wear for the interview. And so I had some sort of a brownish cord jacket. I had sort of brown trousers and it was brownish green cord jacket, and I had a yellow shirt, and I had some sort of tie, and so there I am in Queen's College, and I'm going to and I'm finding the room for the interview, the room where my supervisor to be was in. I knocked on the door, and he opened the door, and Professor John Moffat was wearing exactly the same thing. A very cringy moment. Right.
I think that's wonderful. Do you think he thought you'd done it on purpose?
I thought, well, okay, I might not be a professor, but I can play one on TV.
What was your experience like there at Oxford?
Oh, absolutely lovely. The punting, the intellectual discussions into the small hours, the wandering picnics in the university parks, the punting, the music.
You like the punting?
Yeah, the punting was good. So Oxford was a wonderful 3 years.
And there was also a wonderful story how you celebrated when you left. You went on top of a roof, and what did you do there?
Well, we had to. We left a piece of a garment. I'm not sure how much I put into the book. We left a garment on the Queen's College clock. So you had to climb up to above all the various layers of the college, and then there's a clock tower, and on the front of the clock tower is this clock. So we decorated it with some underwear, which caused the clock to actually snag, and so we had to pay for repair of the clock. So that was how we celebrated having got through the 3 years.
Fantastic. Now we know where it all comes from, don't we? Well, after your studies, you worked at Plessey, one of the big 3 UK telecommunications companies at the time, and then you went on to work at CERN in Switzerland, known as the European Laboratory for Particle Physics, also the European Organization for Nuclear Research. You started with just 6 months there at first, Tim. What was that like for you?
this electronic sort of kid from England getting a chance to work in Switzerland.
Yeah.
Live in Geneva. So there was a hangout with all these physicists from different parts of the world in this handy physics lab. It was really exciting. So we were there for 6 months. During that time, we thought we'd done Geneva. We learned to ski in the winter. We learned to windsurf in the summer. And so we felt that we were really total expat physicists. And after 6 months, but it was CERN is a wonderful place. If you get a chance to go there, go there.
You went back there a few years later, didn't you, for a fellowship? But I believe that there was a certain coffee machine that played a very important part.
The coffee machine was an important part because both times the coffee machine was a coffee area. There was a coffee area where you could go along, and the main corridors of the proton synchrotron division met this place. Yeah. And so if you had a coffee there, you could grab a coffee, grab a croissant, of course, and then you could pick out of the flow of people going by the people you wanted to talk to, and ask them how their bit of equipment works, because there's the documentation about how people have brought all these pieces of equipment from different parts of the world. They spoke different languages, and their computers spoke different languages. So if you wanted to interface one piece of kit that you were building to them, really the coffee area turned out to be really important because you could grab anybody out of the flow and ask them about it, and they would then tell you who you should probably talk to about that, and then pass you on to somebody else.
Yes. So how did that experience, and then when you were there for your fellowship, actually then make you develop the idea for the web?
Well, CERN clearly needed the web because they had to rely on this coffee area. They had to rely on some documentation. They had lots of people had written different documentation systems. And so one of the things I noticed is that each person would bring their own computer, type of computer for their own part of the CERN system, the CERN Great Experiment. And when they bring it, they typically write up all of the details about how the system works in their own personal language. They'd also sometimes they make their own computers. They make their own documentation system, just in order to keep all that information for themselves. That's learned for other people. And so all these documentation systems didn't talk to each other. But I also noticed that when they tried to persuade other people to use the documentation system, then they'd go on stage, talk to a group of people, and they'd say, here's a documentation system, we should all use it. To use it, you have to put your data on the IBM. And then they could see, all in the audience, most of the people didn't use the IBM. So most of the people would use a different computer system. Or so what they did, each of these systems that they'd invent would be very specific to a particular type of document. And so I knew that the web would have to be universal. So that's where the idea of the web being a universal space came from.
And what was the initial reaction like from your colleagues? Again, there's a story you tell in the book about your friend Meryl, and you go skiing with Meryl, and you're actually trying to draw it out for her with a ski pole.
She remembers me drawing the web as a diagram in the snow. Yes. So I don't know whether she actually got the point, but but I think she understood how important it was to me. And then after a while, maybe the ski pole drawings got more and more explicit, and maybe I got better at drawing the drawings in the snow and persuading people what the web was.
Well, Merrill and the ski pole are forever in the book, Tim. And of course, in March 1989, when you first submitted the memo for the idea of the World Wide Web to your bosses at CERN, what was their first initial reaction?
So initially, I wrote a memo about it in 1989, and I passed, because somebody said, you keep talking, Coffee, you keep talking to me about this hypertext thing, so why don't you write it up? So I wrote it up, and then a year later, I asked them again, what should I do about the hypertext thing? And they said, well, you should write a memo about it. And I said, well, but actually I did. So they said, well, send it to me. So I said, okay, I'll send it again. So I actually put 2 dates, March 1989, May 1990 on the top of the memo. So that just to rub it in, you have seen this before. Well, you can't blame CERN, really, because CERN was a place for doing physics experiments. This was not a physics experiment. So CERN didn't really have any place where I could go to say, I want to make, where is the place where we get funding for global hypertext projects? But what happened was, in fact, that Mike Sendall, my boss's boss, Peggy was my boss, and Mike Sendall was her boss, and he seemed to have liked the idea. And he told me that he said, we should get hold of the next computer, because he wanted to use the next computer. Steve Jobs had just left Apple to go and make the next computer. So he said, well, okay, I give in. You can buy a next computer, and your excuse will be just to kick the tires on this next computer. Why don't you develop that thing that you've always been talking about, that hypertext thing, with a twinkle in his eye?
Thank goodness for him.
So it turned out that, unfortunately, Mike died around 10 years later, but when Peggy eventually came across his copy of the memo, he'd written in the corner in pencil, vague but exciting. Fortunately, not exciting but vague. Otherwise, he probably would not let me do it.
How did the CERN phone book play a part? Because that also did.
I had to get somebody to use this web thing, and so but it turned out that the CERN IT people had a problem at the time that the CERN phone book was a physical thing, but they had an online version which everybody used on the mainframe. Yeah. People logged into the IBM mainframe sometimes only to use the phone book. So that was a bit silly, because they had lots of different they had lots of Unix machines, they had lots of VAX, VMS computers, HP computers, so there were lots of different types of computer, lots of Unix machines. Why should they have to log into this IBM mainframe just to be able to get a phone book? So the guy maintaining the phone book on the computer was given the task of getting it to run on everywhere else. And so he used the web for that. He just gave people a very, very simple web browser, a line mode one, where you'd just type in, you could type in phone and a name, and it would print out a list of, but it was using the web. And so that was the second web server, if you like.
Tim, it wasn't always called the web. You had come up with other names. Can you share the initial name you came up with?
Well, I called it the mesh, but so in fact I had a few names. Well, one was the information mine, but that would be Tim, which was a little bit egotistical. Or mine of information would be moi, which would be maybe even more egotistical. So moi, Tim. Mesh was what I called it but Eventually, I decided that www, it had to be www, because W's were rare. Nobody else had think there were going to be no more projects called www. If you put a computer on the web and you called it www, it's probably going to be pretty clear that it was running a web server.
You mentioned Steve Jobs.
Yeah, people complained that www is more longer to search than wah wah wah. So that.
Well, what did they know?
Well, the acronym was longer than the word itself.
Well, talking about Steve Jobs and how important it was because of his next computer at the time, there was almost a moment where you did meet him in Paris, and you write about this in the book. What happened?
So, yeah, almost. There was a meeting in France of people who had projects on the Next, and we were invited. So the World Wide Web project was invited, and so we went along, and they had a Next for us to demonstrate. They had a sort of row of Next. Everybody had a table, and so we had the World Wide Web project all running, and Steve Jobs came into the room, and he came and looked at and had little chats with each of the people. And he came all the way around the room till he got almost to us, and then he was called away on business.
Oh, no.
So we missed him, so I got that close to him. But that was, and yeah, who knows? I do wonder if, I feel that if he had seen the World Wide Web, then I think he would have got it, because he talked about the next computer being not a personal computer, but an interpersonal computer. And so I think he would have got it, and maybe he would have seized on the web as being a way to achieve his dreams of the next being what it did. But that isn't the way it went.
Yeah. One of those sliding doors moments, I think. What are your thoughts on the dominance of Apple's products and software today under Tim Cook?
So now we have Apple. So it's nice that the next machine that I developed the web on is now basically that the chain of development has led to Apple. So Apple, to a certain extent, is great for me to use because it reminds me of that old next machine. The question is, what do I think about dominance of Apple? So in general, I feel that the dominance of monopolies, any monopoly, it's always bad for business. It's always bad for new companies. It's bad for innovation. So yeah, when Apple is the only company making phones, then all of the smarts about how to make new phones has to happen in Apple Labs, and which is just as all of the when AT&T was a monopoly telephone supplier, all of the smarts about telephones had to be developed at AT&T Labs, so on and so on. In general, when you have a monopoly, it's not good for innovation.
Well, you've always said from the very beginning, Tim, that your mission has always been about keeping the web open source, transparent, and freely accessible. I want to ask you why that was so important to you at the beginning, and how easy was it to convince CERN to publish and relinquish the IP, which they did in 1993?
They did, yes. Robert Caillou and I both were the two people working on the web, and we spent time lobbying the CERN community while learning the CERN directorate. We had to get somebody sufficiently high level, and eventually we ended up with a commitment from CERN, signed and stamped by a director, saying this is to commit that CERN won't charge royalties on the World Wide Web technology. And so that was really, really important for it to take up. There was a project like the web called Gopher, which in fact crashed at that point because more or less I think people avoided it because it wasn't free. The University of Minnesota, who ran the Gopher project, said, if you're using it in future, not now, for now it's free, but in the future, potentially, we could charge you royalties. And so people ran screaming away from Gopher and demanded the web be free.